May 26, 2025. A quiet but thunderous policy shift ripples across Europe. Standing at a press podium in Berlin, Germany's newly elected Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, delivers a statement that will echo far beyond the borders of Ukraine. Ukraine is free to strike inside Russia. That wasn't a misquote, that was confirmation. After months of behind-closed-door discussions, diplomatic warnings, and mounting pressure from the front lines, the gloves are off. Germany, France, the United Kingdom, and the United States have all formally lifted range restrictions on the long-range missiles they've been supplying to Ukraine since 2022. For the first time since the full-scale invasion began, Ukraine now has official permission to strike military targets across the Russian border using NATO-grade weapons. Storm Shadow cruise missiles from the UK, Taurus missiles from Germany, precision-guided HIMARS from the United States. All of them can now go deep into Russian territory, command centers, logistics hubs, fuel depots, airfields. Nothing beyond the front line is off-limits anymore. Western leaders framed the move as a necessary shift, a response to Russia's continued attacks on Ukrainian civilians, missile strikes on cities like Kharkiv, and intensifying pressure on NATO's eastern flank. But make no mistake, this isn't just a battlefield development, this is a paradigm shift, a red line erased. And every time red lines get erased in Europe, global markets react, often in ways most people never see coming. One of those ways? Gold. Because when military escalation hits a new tier, investors don't wait for missiles to land. They move early, and they move into metal. We've seen it before, in 2014, in 2022, and again in early 2025. But what makes this different is how bold the move was, how many nations are now on board, and how little time there may be before markets adjust again. Because when money starts running to safety, gold is usually the first door it knocks on. And to see just how hard it might be knocking this time, we need to go back and track the pattern. When Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, gold moved. In February 2022, when tanks crossed into Ukraine, gold hit a peak of over $2,050 per ounce, a price not seen since the pandemic. Why? Because gold is a barometer of trust, and when that trust breaks, in currencies, in borders, in global stability, gold starts flashing red. This isn't just investor fear, it's central bank behavior. In 2022 and 2023, global central banks bought more than 1,000 tons of gold each year, double the average of the previous decade. The World Gold Council confirmed it as the strongest central bank demand on record. These weren't random buys. They were strategic hedges against dollar volatility, inflation, and geopolitical spillover. So now that Ukraine is authorized to strike inside Russia, markets are watching closely. The precedent? Every major escalation in this conflict has led to upward pressure on gold, and with this latest shift, we could be entering another one of those moments. And just before we go deeper, if you're watching this to stay ahead of the curve, hit like, share this with someone who's stacking, and subscribe to Don Gilded. This isn't hype. This is history in motion. Let's be clear. This wasn't a symbolic gesture. Lifting range restrictions opens the door for Ukraine to strike command centers, fuel depots, and missile launch sites inside Russian territory, not just at the front lines. Weapons like the UK's Storm Shadow, Germany's Taurus cruise missile, and US-supplied HIMARS systems can now reach targets far beyond the border. Russia's response was swift. Threats of counter-escalation, warnings of serious consequences, and strong signals that retaliation could follow if NATO weapons are used on Russian soil. This type of policy shift is rare and risky, not because it guarantees a wider war, but because it adds strategic uncertainty. And in markets, uncertainty is a pressure valve. It doesn't wait to explode, it leaks value, one inflation-adjusted ounce at a time. Historically, policy escalations like this have caused investors to reposition fast. In early 2022, the day after the invasion began, the price of gold jumped over 3% in 24 hours. It reached over $2,050 in just 2 weeks. So now that missiles have the green light to cross borders, gold may already be recalibrating. You might be wondering, has gold already priced this in? As of the first quarter of 2025, gold surged past $3,100 per ounce. That's not a projection, that's fact. The increase was tied to a combination of persistent inflation worries, rising demand from China and India, and deepening geopolitical fractures. According to data from the World Gold Council and historical charts from goldprice.org, this year marks one of the sharpest Q1 gains in gold since 2009. And the lifting of missile restrictions? That decision landed in late May. The full market reaction is still unfolding. But here's the historical clue. The biggest spikes in gold don't happen during the moment. They happen after the market absorbs what that moment really means. So the true surge, if it comes, might still be ahead. One of the clearest signals that gold could rise further is what central banks are doing behind the scenes. In 2022 and 2023, Poland added nearly 300 tons of gold to its reserves. Singapore increased holdings by 45%. Turkey made massive purchases before temporary sell-offs to defend its currency. In 2024, China discreetly reported continuous monthly purchases, adding over 200 tons, its most aggressive accumulation since the early 2000s. The reasoning is simple. If fiat becomes unstable, or geopolitics disrupt global trade, physical gold becomes the fallback. And now in 2025, 2025, with a conflict in Eastern Europe threatening to spill across borders, that fallback is looking more like a front run. Gold is no longer just a hedge, it's a statement. And the question becomes, when central banks move this quietly, how long until retail follows? The lifting of missile restrictions is a major shift, but it might not be the last. US officials have already hinted that if Russian retaliation targets NATO infrastructure, even digitally, the alliance could consider it grounds for Article 5 discussions. That's the clause that treats an attack on one as an attack on all. Even short of that, wider use of long-range missiles increases the risk of escalation, especially if strikes reach civilian-adjacent infrastructure or provoke Russian airspace violations. For investors, the scenario isn't about headlines, it's about probabilities. If there's even a small chance that NATO becomes directly involved, or that supply chains to Europe destabilize, gold will likely rise in anticipation, not reaction. The pattern is consistent. Crisis begins, markets hesitate, gold spikes on fear, then climbs again on policy response, and we may be entering that second phase right now. Lifting missile restrictions in Ukraine might seem like a military detail, but it's not. It's a signal to markets, to institutions, and to anyone holding fiat that stability is cracking at the edges again. Gold has already responded in the past, 2014, 2022, and early 2025. Each time it surged not because of war itself, but because of what war reveals, that the financial system is only as strong as the illusion of peace. So now, that illusion is thinner than ever. And gold? Gold is listening. What would you do if gold hits $5,000? Sell while it's hot, or hold for the long game? Let us know in the comments, and we'll feature the best takes in our next breakdown. And if you want to be the first to know when the next gold trigger hits, subscribe to Don Gilded. Like the video, share it with someone stacking. We don't chase hype, we chase the metal.